It's easier to pass by an accident or a tragedy than to stop and get involved. The people who are willing to interrupt their own lives to help a stranger are the exceptional few. I'm William Shatner. Tonight, true stories of extraordinary heroes on Rescue 911. We begin in rural New Jersey. Actors portray the Chambers family in this reenactment, but some of the footage you will see was taped as night fell on April 24th, 1986, and the last chance rescue attempt was made. Less than an hour outside of New York City lies the farming community of Colts Neck, New Jersey. On the first nice day of spring, Tom Chambers was home watching his two children on his day off.
I was home alone with the kids. I had Christopher and Tara playing in a sandbox. Come around 6:30, my wife arrived home.
As I was getting out of the car, I heard the phone ringing, so I asked my husband to answer the phone.
I walked in through the screen door, answered the telephone, was on the phone for a minute or less, and I saw Christopher get up out of the sandbox and start to toddle down the driveway.
2-year-old Christopher was only out of his parents' sight for a few minutes.
At that point, there was no major alarm because we're at least a half mile from the highway. We have a nice front yard.
Cheryl, Chris is going down the road.
Christopher! We both went out the front door at the same time, looked at the yard, and Chris was nowhere.
Christopher!
I thought I heard him crying, but it was a very muffled cry. And at that point, I knew that he might be in trouble because he was crying.
I heard a lot of hysterical screaming and yelling, and I came running out from behind the house, and there I saw my wife flailing her arms, screaming that Christopher had fallen into a hole.
The boy had fallen 12 feet underground into a hole only 12 inches wide.
All that you could see was his little hands right at the top of his head. There was no way to reach him.
I immediately ran for the house as I picked up the phone. At that point, I was in such a panic that I had a great deal of difficulty dialing the telephone.
The 400-acre farm the Chambers leased house was on was being subdivided. The unmarked hole had been drilled by a company taking soil samples in preparation for the housing development. Most of the other holes had already been filled in. Police Sergeant Tom Hartman took charge at the scene.
When I first looked into the hole, my first thought was, we're in serious trouble here. We're in serious trouble. I've been in first aid for over 25 years now, and I've been in a lot of accidents, and I've extricated people from cars, but never anything like this.
You couldn't reach him. You couldn't touch him. You couldn't let him know that it was okay.
We figured we would get the rope and see if we could loop the boy's hands. But being so young, his hands were so soft, the rope would just slip off. There was nothing to really get a hold of. It was just frustrating. There's the boy within our sight, and we couldn't get him.
I'll never forget the feeling that I had when I first got there. I'll just never forget that sight.
Volunteer Fire Captain Ernie Hallam was the next to arrive.
The greatest fear I think everyone had was a cave-in. If the hole had caved in, there would have been no way to rescue Christopher.
When we continued,
there was so much dirt on top of his head, and I got so scared because I'm thinking that, pretty soon he's going to be covered.
Christopher Chambers had fallen 12 feet underground into a narrow dirt shaft drilled for soil samples. Recent rains had left the area saturated. No one knew how much water was in the bottom of the shaft, nor how long the 2-year-old boy would be able to breathe down there.
I know it might sound a little cold or whatever, but I didn't stand there with my arms around my wife. I wanted my son out of the hole, so whatever I had to do to get him out of the ground, I was prepared to do. I had a great concern about getting him oxygen. I had a tree trimmer in my garage, which was on an aluminum extension pole, and I rigged up a tubing device, and then the police officers lowered it into the hole, and then put it right over the top of his head.
Chris, we got it's okay. Yeah. That way we'll keep the oxygen right there in the face. Even if we have to stay for a while, we're still all right.
One of the problems that immediately began was everybody wanted to look into the hole, so everybody that walked up to the hole would kick a little bit of dirt into the hole.
There was so much dirt on top of his head. I got so scared because I'm thinking that, pretty soon he's going to be covered.
The area immediately around the hole was cleared. Tom Hartman and Ernie Hallam stayed to supply oxygen and encouragement to the boy.
We tried almost anything, and then finally we determined that the best way to rescue him would be to dig a hole that was parallel to the shaft that Christopher was trapped in.
We were going to have to dig, as far as we knew, all the way down.
It was just too big a hole to dig by hand. We really need some sort of a digging machine like a backhoe. So at that point I ran back in the house and started to call anybody in the area who may have a backhoe that we could get over to the house and start to dig.
15-year-old Adam Dean had been at home, his father's backhoe sitting in the yard next door. Though Adam didn't have a license, he drove the huge digging machine a mile to the Chambers house.
The guy came over from the gas station and told me that there was a kid trapped in a well and that he needed the backhoe to get him out. I felt bad for the kid, so I drove it over there myself.
How we doing, Tom?
The backhoe digging would have to be precise. One misstroke could bury the boy, but they had no experienced operators at the scene.
It's a very frustrating feeling to stand there and be able to do absolutely nothing. You can't move the earth.
Colts Neck 707.
Everybody who had a radio or telephone at that point put out emergency calls to get a backhoe operator to start to dig.
By chance, heavy equipment operator Warren Brickman heard the call for help on his police scanner.
When I got there, I said to the sergeant, let's get going here. We put the machine into place, and we started digging.
The basic plan was to make the hole deeper than where he was, and then tunnel upward to him.
At that point, the fear was that the vibration of the backhoe could knock a chunk of dirt loose, and if that were to occur, he'd be buried alive.
Don't be afraid of the noise, Chris. We're coming down here for you, okay?
The worst thing about the whole rescue was my feeling of helplessness. I knew that he wanted his Baba, so I ran in and got him a bottle of milk, and I knew that that would make him feel better.
Hold on, Chris.
He was crying, whimpering. It was very cold in the hole. It was very damp, and we were very concerned at that point.
When the hole was 15 feet deep, they shut down the backhoe. Firemen Jack White and Darren Elliott would have to do the rest of the delicate digging by hand.
A ladder was put down into the hole once that the backhoe had completed its operation. We now had to start tunneling across, approximately 3 to 4 feet. We had almost one incident where one side of the wall almost caved in on us.
I went into my garage and I was pulling panels of plywood off the walls, brought that back, and we shored it with plywood. So the whole time I was basically busy taking care of all these little odd jobs that needed to be taken care of. I wanted my son out of the hole.
More than 2 hours had passed. Night had fallen, and the temperature was dropping. Rescue workers struggled to keep Christopher awake to help protect him from hypothermia.
I know it was very cold on top of the hole, so down 15 feet it must have been significantly colder.
It came a point, it had to be about 2.5, 3 hours into the operation, that he did go quiet on us.
I told Sergeant Hartman, I said, you better see if these guys can hurry it up, because it doesn't look good at this point.
We could just see the tops of his hands. That's all we could see, because now his head was all full of dirt. You couldn't even see his blonde hair.
I just kept thinking dig, dig, dig to get this little boy out. He wants to go home. It was just so hard. The dirt was so hard. The water was rising in the bottom of the well. And every dig or shovel we made, we just didn't know how much further we had to go. It was like you just wanted police break through a hole.
The police officers were trying to keep him active and keep him crying, whatever they could keep him doing. Towards the end, he was totally silent. I saw them getting nervous about that and call over to the fellas doing the digging that they had better hurry it up, because We all felt as though time was running out.
The digging came down to inches.
If he's down 12 feet, and now he's going across 3 to 5, if he's off a little ways, we could miss the boy entirely.
Somebody measure with their hands the distance from where the child is approximate 3 feet. 3 feet, Darren. Touch your hand. Tommy, get that light pole back down there and measure how deep they are. We already got it. In other words, I want them to go the length of the light pole.
They reached a point where they couldn't use full-size shovels anymore, so we ended up searching for toy shovels, or we had an ice cream scooper. None of them really worked well. I finally went in the garage and I found a little spade shovel, and that was finally the shovel that he used that finally got through.
I told Jack to tell them up above that I was going to go ahead and take a shot at pulling him.
Okay? Great. Hold. Sit. That's it. Get him out. Yeah! Back off. Where's the back? Here, right here.
It's just a miracle it didn't cave in, because it was all sand, but I wasn't even worried about it. I'd do it again. I would go back in the hole and do it again.
We couldn't have planned it any better if we had surveyed it. And I'll never forget staring down the hole, just watching him disappear. I just wanted to really meet these guys who had done all the digging down below, and to meet them at the end and shake hands and just really hug each other was an amazing feeling.
I was so elated. I was so happy. And I remember telling him that I loved him about 100 times from here to the hospital. Christopher, I love you. Oh, I'm so happy to see you. Mommy's so happy.
When you almost lose a child like that, you don't know how important or how much love you have for your children. There was a group effort that took place. I'd have to say thank you to everyone.
Christopher is 5 years old now. Though he remembers little about that night, the people who saved him have not forgotten.
The final tool that they had given me was a spaded shovel. When the incident was over, the father had told someone to go down in the hole and get the shovel. When he had come out, he had given it to me as a remembrance. And I have it at home today. And someday I hope to give it back to Chris and tell him, well, here's what did it to you, son, you know? This is the last tool that your father gave me to get you out.
Got it! Home run. Home run.
Next.
My first reaction was shock, and I started pounding on the door. We were yelling, medical emergency, please open up, we need some help.